Good afternoon everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Considerations for Cloud Computing in Charities. We're now ready to get started. All of the attendees will be on mute, so you should only hear two voices throughout this presentation. So going through the agenda for today's webinar, the format of the webinar will be presenting some of the findings that Andrew has done in his white paper, Cloud Computing for Charities in 2013. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, you can type them into your chat window on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll try and get through to questions at the end of the webinar. Any questions that we don't get to, we'll try and get answers and send them out after the session is finished. We'll be putting the presentation up on a slide share for those who want to look at it again. The URL is on the screen now. If you're also on Twitter at the moment, you can also speak to us live at Databarracks. For everyone who's attended, we'll also be sending through a copy of the white paper that Andrew has written after the session. We also, at the end of the presentation, have a poll. We're hosting a Charities Roundtable event in May, and you'll be able to vote on some of the things you would like to discuss as part of that session. So moving on to a quick introduction. I'll pass you over to Andrew Brenson, who will give you a quick background about himself in the charity sector.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everybody. My name's Andrew Brenson. I've worked in IT for the past 20 years. 10 of those years were spent working running the infrastructure and support at Channel 4 Television. After I left the media industry, I had the pleasure of landing in the charity sector and became the IT operations manager at Save the Children UK in 2005. A couple of years after that, after having completely transformed and rebuilt the pathetic IT systems that I encountered there, I then assumed overall control of the Global Information Systems Department in 2008 and ran the IT for Save the Children UK for 4 years. I left there last year, just at the beginning of last year, and since then I've been bouncing around the charity sector and have carried out numerous consultancy engagements for a number of major UK NGOs. Also on my CV is I had the pleasure of acting as treasurer to the organisation known in the past as the Charities Consortium IT Directors Group, which is now renamed with the much more snappy Charity IT Leaders Group. So I've got quite a wide range of contacts across the sector.
So I'll just give a quick introduction to Databarracks as a business if you haven't dealt with us before. So my name's Mark Thomas. I'm a solutions architect for Databarracks. Databarracks has been around for about 10 years, originally founded to provide secure online backup services. Since then we have developed a number of other cloud services as the market's changed, providing things such as disaster recovery as a service and infrastructure as a service. We've asked Andrew to basically put together this white paper because we really wanted to find out how organisations feel about these services, what are the key issues that they seem to have, and what we can do to kind of help them develop these services, especially in the charity sector. So moving on, we start looking at the shape of the cloud marketing and specifically in use cases for charities. So Andrew, the IT scene of the fashion industry and cloud is a hot topic at the moment. How do you see this comparing to other IT fads at the moment?
Well, Mark, as you can see, we've got on the slide deck there a phrase that I stole from Ovum, actually. It doesn't have a credit on there, but I thought it worth actually giving them a credit online. The snappy phrase, it did make me laugh when I saw it. So IT is a fashion industry and cloud computing is the new black. And I think that most people who have worked in IT for any period of time will recognize that the phrase or the concept of IT being very much a fashion industry where something gains a hold and then everybody jumps on the bandwagon. Cloud clearly is a very hot topic, which is kind of why we're sitting around the table talking today. I think the difference between the cloud and perhaps some other historic fads is that the cloud is here to stay. You know, whether we like it or not, and we're coming on to the next slide there, cloud adoption is basically occurring everywhere. Across all sectors, and actually the paper that I've written that obviously will be distributed after this has just been trying to focus on the use of the cloud in the charity sector specifically, and perhaps what the issues are that are encouraging stroke inhibiting the charity sector from using them. we've got this bell curve up there though, so you can see. Right. So I mean, again, most people online will have probably heard the concept of the bell curve within the use of most technologies. So there, what we have really is the classic bell curve concept, and on the far left-hand side, you have the concept of a product. So let's just work on the basis that this is an IT product, and on the far left, we have obviously the bottom line being time. On the far left, we have bleeding edge, and actually I can kind of link this back to my time at Channel 4, because as you can imagine, Channel 4 as a broadcaster and an organisation that was at the forefront of technology usage, were very keen to adopt products at a very early stage, but they had the finances to be able to do that. Obviously, when you're adopting products just after they've been launched, you've got the issues of the stability and reliability of them, and also the cost of implementing and seeing whether or not they're going to be successful at all, because obviously if you adopt something early, you might find that actually it doesn't really gain traction. And there's also the issue of the availability of the skills that you need to actually look after those things. And then as we move along that line, as the curve goes upwards, then that area there that perhaps is highlighted in a kind of purple color, I would describe as the leading edge adopters, and that's still going to be commercial organizations who are taking on products at quite an early stage and gaining early advantage through using them, but nonetheless they are taking a bigger risk perhaps than to adopt a product at an early stage. The red dot exists at a point where I think charities generally, or certainly the more forward-thinking charities, start to adopt these technologies. So basically that's generally after perhaps a couple of service packs or releases, is the point at which the product has actually been on the market for a period of time, maybe 12 to 18 months. It's out there, it's got traction, it's well established, and also crucially you've got a situation where the people that you need to look after that product are available in reasonable numbers. And then progressively as that curve goes upwards, we reach the point at the top where it becomes, that's the peak of its usage, and then going down on the right-hand side, that's as the product, whatever it may be, becomes progressively more obsolete and out of date, until we reach the point on the bottom right-hand side where actually that's where charities are going to live as well, because they will squeeze as much as they can out of the investment that they've made at the point that they've made it. But the issue here is whether or not actually the cloud does follow this bell curve concept. And I don't think it does actually, because obviously the whole bell curve concept assumes that something is going to die at some point. And I think most people will probably accept that the cloud is here to stay and it's not really going to go anywhere. In fact, if anything, the issue is just about the speed of adoption, the rate at which organizations are taking it up. Now, we've got a dot there. I mean, obviously, that on the basis that line is pretty much going to be infinite, or for as far in the future as infinite is likely to be. We've got, I think, a situation. We're sorry, got a bit of feedback now. We've got a situation where cloud technologies certainly weren't adopted at the earliest stage by charities, but it is definitely the case now that they are starting to gain traction. And as we'll discuss as we move on, the issue is more about what the challenges are that are facing charities, and perhaps the things that are stopping charities from embracing the cloud as rapidly as they could do.
So having looked at these adoption curves, how seriously do you think that the charity sector is looking at cloud services at the moment?
I think there is little doubt that the sector is absolutely wide awake and well aware of the cloud, the options that the cloud provide them. But there's not a single easy answer that you can apply to the entire sector. Clearly, cloud services have matured radically over the past few years, but there are still some, shall we say, anxieties which remain long held and are perhaps irrationally strong. There are issues of concern around the securing of sensitive data, the reliability of the services, and just the kind of general management issues which apparently, well, certainly in research that we've done, are regular features amongst the kind of surveys that have been carried out. The Charity Technology Trust, for instance, carried out a global cloud computing survey across 10,600 charities very recently, and of those, 60% reported that a lack of knowledge was the biggest barrier to cloud adoption. So obviously the issue that really exists out there is that gap between the reality of the situation and people's understanding of it.
So given that there's a lack of understanding, do you think that there's a lack of IT representation at the board level within charity organisations?
Well, this is one of my favourite topics actually, and I was recently asked to produce a 500-word article which listeners can Google. I think if you go to the Charity Times website, you'll find an article that I wrote a couple of weeks ago on this very subject, and it is an issue very dear to my heart. I mean, the bottom line is that I don't know of any major UK NGO that has an IT director actually at board level. The reality is that IT reports either into finance, into a services function, or in some extraordinary cases they actually report into a HR director. And as my article suggested, that really means that the IT representation within charities is second-hand. Now, the issue there is then about whether or not IT departments are following best practice, because another point that I've made really is that charities increasingly aspire to copy best practice that they come across within the commercial sector, but quite clearly in the commercial sector it's absolutely the case that IT is increasingly at the top table. And in fact there's a specific example, although it's a bit of a one-off at the moment, where Tesco, their CIO recently became their CEO.
So due to this lack of representation at board level, do you think that this means that charities are more or less likely to be adopting cloud services?
No, I don't think so. I think actually what we're seeing is that whilst IT isn't necessarily directly represented at board level, it is absolutely the case that those people who are at board level are very well aware of the concept of the cloud and the existence of it. Perhaps it's because that and perhaps the issue is that it's the IT director's responsibility to educate their board, given that we're not going to get in a situation anytime soon that they are actually going to get that seat at the top table. The responsibility falls on IT directors to make sure that the perception that exists of the cloud and the understanding of it that exists at board level is correct, because obviously there is undoubtedly the case that a lot of people who are finance directors, HR directors, chief execs, whatever, I mean, that they are absolutely aware of the cloud and they use it in their own individual lives. But that bridge between personal use and the use of it within a corporate environment, there are issues that don't face you in a private sense that would affect you in a corporate one.
Okay, so having talked about the shape of the cloud market at the moment, maybe we should look at some of the key issues that charities face around cloud adoption. If we look at this first slide, this is around cost and capital expenditure, and it's the same for most organisations. So we have two graphs. The graph on the left is a traditional computing model which has a capital outlay and investment in infrastructure which goes over a period of time being amortised and written off. And obviously as capacity grows there's a point where they invest again, and obviously that's a big jump in capital outlay. And on the right hand side we see more of a cloud computing pay-per-use model which has obviously got a much more linear scalability. Now, do you see any reason why charities wouldn't fit into these standard arguments for cloud computing consumption?
No, well, actually, this particular couple of graphs really does demonstrate why cloud computing is potentially manna from heaven for a charity, because charities very often have to invest money into capital equipment, which they'll either put it in they'll buy low, if you like, they'll buy what they need at the time, but then as the organization's need develop, it will then transpire that what they've invested in is insufficient for their needs. Then as you'll see on the left-hand diagram, that sawtooth, they'll then have a burst of investment again to actually scale up their capacity, which will be probably too much for what they need at that point. So whereas the graph on the right, indicates that cloud computing can directly scale to your needs. So actually this particular graph I find particularly very descriptive, picture paints 1,000 words. This is particularly strong way of actually demonstrating to perhaps the non-technical people the advantages that can be gained through using scalable in the cloud services.
So having seen these kind of cost benefits of infrastructure, are there any kind of hidden costs that organisations need to watch out for that aren't readily visible?
Well, I guess the problem is, and this is an issue that faces lots of people, and as is represented on this very nice slide that's just popped up, you're not working from a clean sheet. and most organizations will have a pre-existing investment in the infrastructure that they're running, and so therefore if they, and a worked example that you might use is say an email system. So you've got a corporate environment, you're running your standard corporate systems, you've got a CRM system, you've got HR, you've got finance, etc. But then your email system is kind of coming to the end of its life, and therefore is perhaps a good candidate for you to push into the cloud. The issue, obviously, is that if you do move, you shut down your Exchange server and you move that service into the cloud, it doesn't mean that you can then shut down your computer room, and it doesn't necessarily then mean that you can remove all of the staff that look after your existing systems. So I think one of the big issues that I've found, and talking to a lot of people, they've communicated this to me, the issue in the transition is that for a period of time, and potentially quite a long period, you're going to end up running both. You're going to end up basically still hosting your own internal systems at the same time as pushing things out into the cloud as and when it becomes appropriate to do so. So actually the cost model, although one of the arguments that can be used sometimes for using cloud services is that you have a reduction of cost. But for a period of time while you're carrying out the transition, you've actually got increased costs because you haven't really reduced very much the cost of hosting your existing systems whilst you've started moving across to new ones.
Okay, so moving on to talk a little bit more about the operational side of the costs. It would be traditional to say that obviously on-premise you would probably spend about 70% of your time actually looking after the infrastructure and 30% of the time trying to manage your business, whereas obviously with cloud-based services you kind of flip that and you'd have about 70% of your time doing business-orientated operations rather than looking after your assets. How do you think that the charities can deal with any issues that they may face from this change in their IT operations?
Well, this, I mean, and it ties in slightly to what I was just saying. I mean, if we're working on the basis that progressively, as you have moved your services into the cloud, your reliance on people to actually look after your core infrastructure will reduce. But the need for you to continue to have, and in fact, possibly to even strengthen the other elements of an IT function. So perhaps moving away from the traditional server support and network support model, but certainly people who are qualified to carry out business analysis, the project management elements, they will all remain as strong as ever. And indeed, actually, the additional requirement will be in the need to develop and grow the capacity that you have to actually manage the relationships that you have developed with the third parties who are now hosting your systems in the cloud. So that's a realignment and a repurposing of the roles within your department. The other issue that you face, of course, is that as you, particularly if you've moved away and pushed systems into the cloud and you've actually lost staff who used to do jobs for you that you don't need to employ anymore because you're buying those services from the cloud, you're losing skills from within your organization, and you're also potentially losing institutional memory. So but these are not necessarily just issues that face the charity sector. I mean, these are issues that exist across any organization that is adopting the cloud services.
Okay, so having said this about operations and financial costs, what other issues do you see for cloud computing for charities and non-for-profit organisations?
Well, I think part of the problem is that there's just so many suppliers out there, you know, because linking back to the earlier statement about the cloud being a fashion industry, there are so many organizations now that are selling cloud services. The challenge that faces most IT directors is, well, which ones can I trust? Which ones actually are going to do what they say versus which ones are all hype and marketing, and in fact when I actually start to use them they're going to prove an absolute nightmare to be with. This is where I think the concepts of there being some kind of trade body comes in particularly useful, and you'll see on the bottom right hand side of that slide there, and I'll say this not just as a plug for Databarracks because they are a member of it, but actually because I've been involved more recently in the Cloud Industry Forum. That is an organization which is attempting to set standards for cloud providers to follow, and in fact those cloud providers do have to put numerous ticks in boxes, and they have to be BSI and ISA and security certified in order to actually gain membership to that organization. But I think there's a really big gap in the market for buyers of cloud services to basically be able to say, well, okay, you know, it's almost like the classic kite mark idea, you know, a standard for organizations, so that actually I can see a situation in a few years' time where if you are a cloud provider but you are not a member of an accredited body, then actually you probably will be excluded from tenders. And I do hope that is the case. I think it really is important for the cloud industry as a whole to actually get their act together and actually have standards that they all follow, and that they have a kind of like standardized mark such as the one that the Cloud Industry Forum is providing.
Thanks for that, Andrew. So moving on, X as a service. So obviously, as we talked about, cloud services is a hot topic, it's a buzzword. There are many acronyms now which are being bandied about. If you could maybe go into some of the services that you found as part of your research and any specific charity services that you may have come across.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously we've been talking generally about the cloud at the moment, but as you start to drill down, we've got this X as a service concept. So I think if we look at that slide, you'll look around the one you've got in green there. You've got SaaS, software as a service, platform as a service. In fact, actually, that one on the left is slightly obscured, so I can't see it. Right, it's infrastructure as a service, business process as a service, disaster recovery as a service. The one in the middle actually is one that I haven't seen yet, but we put it up there just as to kind of make the point that marketeers are constantly trying to find a niche and a new set of acronyms that they can kind of use to market their products. And that one, for instance, FRAS, could be fundraising as a service, which links into your question, because obviously there are CRM systems which are being used increasingly by charities. So you've got Salesforce, you've got Thank You, you've got Microsoft Dynamics, for instance, out there. I mean, you know, the whole point here is that there is lots of marketing hype around different types of cloud services. In my mind, you know, actually they're all just labels. What you need to do is start to actually investigate and study more closely the specific products that you're using, and perhaps try just to avoid these marketing acronyms.
Okay, so green IT is the next subject we're going to cover. It's maybe not as popular as it used to be, but it's obviously still important for a number of organisations. How do you view cloud services as being green?
Well, I've always had a slightly controversial approach to green services, and I won't go into it too much here, but certainly perhaps some of the people tuned into this I've had conversations with about in the past. My angle really in relation to green is that rather than to try to talk about carbon dioxide output, it's probably better to actually look at the cost of the energy that you're using. And so obviously if you manage to reduce your energy consumption, then by extension you will automatically become green. It certainly is the case though that in the charity sector specifically, whereas the economic argument might win over within a corporate organization, there are people, I can think of at least two people who are CIOs or heads of IT within major UK charities that actually have built into their job specifications an ecological requirement to actually reduce the carbon output of the systems that they're responsible for. Whether or not actually moving things into the cloud is green, or whether or not actually you're just offsetting your carbon dioxide onto somebody else, is a bit of a moot point. And again, people who get the paper will be able to read more detail on this, because there's a very good page that relates to this particular subject. There are certainly charities. I believe Greenpeace produced a piece of research recently where they just highlighted the fact that many of the cloud providers, perhaps in this country, are just using energy in much the same way as you would be doing yourself if you were in this country. So perhaps if you're looking at it from a green point of view, and if you've got a requirement within your job scope to truly reduce the carbon output, then you need to look a little bit more closely at exactly the credentials of the provider that you're using.
So you still see that green is an important factor for charities and non-profit organisations outside of the major environmental charities?
Yeah, well, I think there's an expectation, really, the general concept that all organisations are being increasingly pressurised to become more ecologically responsible. Then the nature of the sector anyway means that perhaps, you know, there's one thing for Tesco's to, and I don't want to offend them there, I'm sure, as long as their lawyers are not listening in. You know, I mean, there's one thing for a major corporate organisation to be gobbling up vast amounts of the world's resources is one thing, but quite clearly, if a charity is doing it, then it's not going to be quite so good for their reputation. So I think there's an expectation on the part of the people who are contributing to charities that they will automatically take green issues into account. Although so actually, you know, that's kind of part of the irony really is that as a result of that, the opportunity to use green cloud services is that much stronger upon some charities than it would be if you're a corporate organization for that reason.
Okay, so having talked through all of these particular issues that potentially could be faced by adopting cloud services, what general advice do you have for organisations who are looking to adopt?
Well, I've actually got a list of as long as your arm here, actually, and quite clearly we could go on for quite a long time, but we're rapidly running out of time. So I'll top that by saying caveat emptor, you know, let the buyer beware. You really must tread carefully. Don't believe the hype. Quite clearly it is the case that free services are not just going to be free. There are always going to be side issues with them, and you get what you pay for. I mean, particularly with free services, there are no SLAs. So I'm certainly aware of an organisation that basically a newly created organisation that didn't buy a PBX. They decided to use Skype as their primary phone system, which was okay until an XP service pack upgrade in August 2009 took Skype down for 48 hours. So that was fine. They had mobile phones. Clearly, it's, you know, some of the other stuff is what you do whenever you're buying any kind of services. You get references from existing customers. You should consider the whole of life costs, and particularly, you know, if you're moving systems into the cloud, it may well be that at some point in the future you might want to actually pull that system back out of the cloud again. So you'd need to consider how you would recover your data and what mechanisms are in place to allow you to do that. So you've got to be really, really careful about the contractual arrangements that you enter into. You need to make sure that the SLAs are clearly understood, because if you're buying a service over the cloud, then basically that cloud service is, you're connecting it from your corporate network to their internal systems, and you're using the public internet to do that. So it may well be the case that actually when you suddenly find that your major system that you're fundamentally dependent upon is not available at the time that you need it most, and you call your provider, they will say to you, well, it's working okay at our end. Which kind of links in with what I was saying earlier on about the need to actually retain appropriate skills within your organisation. There's obviously the standard stuff about business case, but one thing I will do actually is to wrap this up is take an opportunity to mention that, linking back to my time at Channel 4, I never met my peers within ITV or Sky or the BBC because they were commercial organisations and they kept their cards close to their chest. Whereas in the charity sector, it's highly collaborative, and there are two particular organisations that many people will know of. There is the Charity IT Leaders Group that I mentioned earlier, but there's also the Charity Security Forum, both of which exist to enable IT leaders within the charity sector to talk to each other, to share experience and knowledge.
Thank you for that advice. And on the sharing the knowledge, we talked about at the beginning of the webinar that Databarracks is hosting a charity round table event on the 15th of May in central London. Hopefully on your screens you should see the poll which allows you to vote for topics that you may want to see at that event, and obviously you will be invited along to that event. So I'll just give you a minute to try and vote on that before we start going into the Q&A session. Okay, so we'll get on with the question and answer session now. So we've got a couple of questions here. If you obviously have any more questions, please write them in now. We've had a question in: how many charities are using the cloud today as a percentage?
That's a very good question, and thank you for answering it. Another piece of information that we gathered in the compilation of this report is there's an organisation called LARSA who carried out a charity digital survey as recently as November 2012, and of a poll of 334 charities, 37% of them said that they were currently using cloud technologies. So that's only just over a third. I mean, in practice, I think sometimes people think they're not using cloud technologies when, for instance, they are. So, I mean, a classic example is if you're routing your email through an organization such as Message Labs or Mimecast, then effectively what you've got there is a hybrid cloud arrangement. Even if you've got your Exchange servers internally, the mail that is being fed in and out of that system is actually going through a cloud service provider. So I've got my doubts about the validity of that. I suspect that there are a significant number of organizations now today who are using such an arrangement, perhaps without even realizing that it is cloud.
Okay, we've got another question here. Would you agree that hybrid cloud model is the way forward?
Well, I didn't see that question before I answered the last one, but that kind of that absolutely fits in. Yeah, I don't think there's a kind of one or the other solution here. There are plenty of, and I touched upon the fact earlier on that there are lots of charities who have got a lot of investment in existing systems, particularly ones that have been customized to their specific needs. And so that, it depends what you're talking about. I just used the example of hybrid as within the concept of just an email system. So you've got an element of that that's internal, but you've also got another part of that email in inverted commas system that's external. If you're talking about it from a hybrid perspective, when your infrastructure is hybrid, so that you still continue to have specific systems which are hosted within your organization because you've got a long-term investment in them, you've got you can't basically buy that system out of the cloud easily, and you probably wouldn't save any money even if you tried to do so. Whereas there are other things which are more kind of like generic and standardized that you can buy in the cloud. So in that concept, I would say that hybrid is absolutely the way that it's going to go.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. I'm considering moving more certain services to the cloud, but security is still a big concern for us. What's your view on cloud security?
Right. Okay. Well, I think the bottom line is and again, another piece of research that I did separate from this is that I looked at how many organisations, how many NGOs within the UK actually have a dedicated security function, and the answer is a frighteningly low number. In most cases, the responsibility for security within IT security within organisations is generally shared across a number of individuals, or in some cases it doesn't really appear on the agenda of many people at all. Although, there is a particular, within the report, and again, you'll be able to see this when you get it, but within the report, and I'm just trying to find the page at the moment, if you bear with me, there is a comment that's been made about the fact that ultimately cloud providers are going to, I found it now, it was actually Director of Programs at Charity Technology Trust who said that cloud providers spend far more money on security than charities are able to, and what they have in place is far superior to most not-for-profits because their commercial lives depend upon it.
Thank you very much for your answers. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. We've got a few other questions, so we'll make sure that Andrew answers those and sends them out with the rest of the collateral. We did get asked if there will be a copy of the audio for this webinar. Yes, we'll be sending that out as well. So thank you very much for attending this afternoon. Hope you enjoyed it and it was very informational. We'll be obviously sending out Andrew's white paper as well to everyone who's attended the webinar today, and also if you want to keep an eye out for the charity roundtable event in May, you'll also be invited to that, where obviously you can discuss the topics in further detail. Thank you very much for attending today, and goodbye.
Thanks, then. Bye-bye.